Brianna Martin is our secretary. Madeline Crow is our treasurer. And Leslie Evans, who had a flat tire this morning, who's not here, is our vice president. And I'm Austin Wing, and I am the president. And I want to thank Adrienne McGrath, who's our program chair, for all of her contributions, and Susan Sparrow, who is our internship coordinator and esteemed faculty member, for all of the support that they have lent us. And I also want to recognize Reba Latsea Crow for the catering. Thank you so much for doing that for us. The food is amazing. And I want to thank our workshop facilitators as well, who just walked in the door. Museum Workers Speak, Brenda and Terry, and Amy Cohen. And also Dr. O, who is a JSU faculty member, who will be leading a workshop later, and Adrienne McGraw again. So I want to get started with our panelists, so please let me introduce them to you, and also feel free to come and go as you need to. Restrooms down the hall, and please grab food and coffee in the corner. So let's get started. This is Amy Cohen, and Amy Cohen is the Executive Director of Exhibit Ongoing. She's a JSU alumna. This is Amy Espiritu, and Amy Espiritu is a co-program director at the nonprofit Youth Speak. This is Jessica Bailey, and Jessica Bailey is an individual gaming manager at the Oakland Museum of California. This is Carol Tang, and Carol Tang is the executive director of the Children's Creativity Museum in San Francisco. And last but not least is Pam Wong, who's the deputy director at the Chinese Historical Society of America. So please give a warm round of applause and welcome to our panelists. Okay, so we're just going to start at the top. Have any of you faced challenges that you feel are specific to women, either in your institutions or in your position? And how have you managed those challenges?
The first one up here, hi. Good afternoon, everyone. To be quite honest, I work in development. And I work in a field that's primarily women. And I feel very lucky and fortunate. So I can't quite say that I have faced any challenges as a female in my industry, other than oftentimes you don't see female representation at the director's level in development. That didn't change, and I've seen that change throughout my professional career. I will say that I have faced challenges as a Black woman in the field. I cannot separate being Black from being a woman. I am not allowed that privilege, nor technically do I want to separate them. So really the challenges that I think I faced in the field have been more as being a Black professional in the industry and less about being a woman in the industry. And again, I think that speaks to my field as a fundraiser and it being a field that's primarily made up of women.
So I actually come from a science field, geology, that is the most underrepresented for women. There's the greatest disparity in pay and in gender for geologists. So I come from a field where I was the only graduate student, a woman graduate student in my field and so on. So I think, in my former career and in the trajectory, I was more aware of gender issues. Having come to a museum, and especially being a museum educator, it's almost all women. I mean, we're really lacking diversity, especially if you're talking about role models for under-resourced communities, for men and boys, which are challenging these days. That's kind of a problem. So it's interesting, sort of the twist on it. Maybe I'm more sensitive, having come from a field with such gender disparity, that now I'm in a field that I see gender disparity as well, in different ways, and for different reasons and needs and problems there as well. But I would also agree that being an Asian American has been more of an issue with people not knowing that I speak English, those kinds of things that come with that. And then I think being an Asian American woman does have a lot of, a stereotypes that go with it. So in geology, there's much more issues of being hit on and really negative sexual harassment there. So I would say in the museum field, I haven't experienced that. So changing gears in terms of sort of the job part of it, and as a woman and being a mom with a 7-year-old who's sitting back there eating his 7th cookie, I would say that would be where I realize how many challenges there are. I never thought I would have children of my own. It was only after the academy opened. I was at the California Academy of Sciences. I was head of exhibits from 2008. And in 2009, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. I'm 40 years old. I just opened up a museum with 2.5 million visitors. I actually don't know what I'm going to do. Oh, well, maybe I should have a baby. And that's what I did. So I had Philip when I was 41. And I'd been an educator and worked with kids and talked to parents for my whole professional career up to that moment and never had my own. So I do think I am much more sensitive now to issues of what parents face as visitors to a museum, but then also obviously as a parent. So as you see, I just explained to someone, he works a lot of Saturdays. Both his dad and I are both museum professionals, and he was at the March for Science, as a prop, I think, the other day. And he's here today as a prop about what it means to be a woman professional. And the kind of stress about, what is there for lunch? I can't pick them up on time. 2 days this week, I had BART delays. I had to have my dad go and pick them up when I was responsible for picking him up. And I get him, and he asked me, where was I? I was worried about you. And I'm 2 hours late picking him up almost every day, 2 days this week. So I think as someone who's become a late parent and understands sort of the gender, but also how difficult it is, I'm much more aware, and I'm sure I will be in the years to come, that there are unique challenges and opportunities for being a woman professional in our society today.
As for me, I don't. Yeah, again, it's a female field that we're in, so I haven't had specific gender issues other than that I'm carrying a heavy box and I need help. Like some men would offer, some men would not even notice, some men would insist on helping me. And so these are the issues that do come up, but there's not, when I need help, I don't really care who they are. If it's a heavy box, I just want somebody to be there. It doesn't really matter who they are. And so these gender roles play out, but it's also an ongoing process.
It's great to be here, everyone. Thanks for having us. I really want to thank Jessica and Carol for what you said around your identities also impacting us as women in the workplace, let alone like museum professions or just like professions, period. So I think for me, crossing and intersecting different identities as a Filipina and a queer woman, and also, I'll be real, like a masculine presenting woman, it kind of messes me up in certain ways where, the last time I checked, challenges are daily, yesterday. More and more I realize while speaking with other women of color, other queer folks, other, again, very gendered expression folks, I think the various positionalities of our leadership is creating a strength-based response instead of a deficit or like what's different about me or what's hard about my identities when I'm navigating leadership. So I wrote some notes and I'm not going to try to get too hyped today, but I'll just say what I think is most difficult for me in these intersections are these gendered, to your point too, Pam, these gendered assumptions regarding who is best for specific tasks or projects that perpetuate gendered roles in the workplace. So can I share like one example? I'm feeling this crowd. So to this day, in 2007, more often than not, of course, I'm sure some of you have experienced this as men and women. Men are still expected by other men and women to assume the role of having the big idea, being the visionary, the strategic innovators, and speaking whenever they want, even if it's off topic. It's okay. I'm an allyship with y'all. But while women are still expected by men and women too to assume the role of convening, calling the meeting, calling the strategy, facilitating the planning, leading the brainstorm, and also like reading it back in. These are all gendered roles that both benefit men and benefit women, and also I think complexify our gender dynamic in leadership, right? I feel like you're nodding your head. I mean, I've been a director for only 3 years, and While I was a manager at the Children's Creativity Museum, my first job out of my Master's in Ed program, where I could truly combine my passions for design, exhibit development, education, youth development, I had to jump through so many hoops, even though on paper, I was a thought partnership with my directors. I had amazing people at the museum or other programs that I was working in where they made space for me. It took me to have a director title to really face these kind of nuanced ways that gender roles and assumptions impact leadership. So I hope that frames it.
So I will say that I recognize that my experiences have been colored by the fact that I'm a white woman, so I've had to do a lot less jumping through hoops. I think where I face some challenges is that I'm a young director. I'm 28 years old. When I assumed this position, I was 27. And so I don't look like I have knowledge or experience to some people, and those people tend to be older white men who are very open about sharing that with me. So as an example, at the recent California Association of Museums conference, I was staffing the exhibit Envoy Table. We're a nonprofit that travels museum exhibits around California and around the US, but we're small. I'm the director and I'm one of 2 people who work there. So an older white man came up to me and asked questions about one exhibit. I introduced myself as the director, I answered his questions, then he gave me his card, and at the end of our interaction, he looked at me and said, well, so who can I talk to about this in the future that can speak for the organization? And so I said, well, me. As I said earlier, I'm the director. And he gave me like kind of this weird look and just kind of walked away. So I think I tell that anecdote just to share, it's like these kind of like weird small things are the things that have come up the most. It's never been outright discrimination for me, just like these little things that kind of add up as I talk to people from museum to museum.
And then I would like to add, not that anybody asked me, but I'm going to add it anyway, that I have a sexually ambiguous name. Austin is a man's name and a woman's name, and I find that I command more respect digitally when people see my name written with an E-N and spelled with an I-N anyway. So I experience like microaggressions, as I would describe them, over email when people perceive me to be a woman rather than perceiving me as being a man, and oftentimes they meet people in person and they're expecting to meet a man. So I experience it too, also as a white woman, and I think it's important that we talk about intersectionality, so thank you all for bringing that up. But now I want to pivot to empowering positive behaviors, because what I really want to leave everyone with today is tools in which we can go forth in the world and be better to each other and for each other. So alternatively, have you observed positive, empowering, or supportive actions taken by, for, or on behalf of women in your field, workplace, or position? And what do you take from those experiences? And any advice you have to give us would be welcome. Take a lot of time.
Okay, well, so I think that we're pretty lucky to be in the museum field because it is female dominated, and so women have always been really supportive of me in this field because I think that especially those of us who worked in other nonprofit fields or other in sciences, kind of understand that that's not the norm. So I've always been really lucky that I've had a lot of female managers and supervisors who have allowed me to take the initiative, do my own work, try new things, and have always backed me up when it's come for, asking for a pay raise, that sort of thing. Always giving me credit for doing the work that I've done, which is really important, and not something that some male supervisors have always done. So I know I've always felt very empowered by the other women around me in this field.
So I'm experiencing like in real time, and this is a great moment in leadership for women, but I'm having like 2 very different experiences in terms of having many years being in the education field, being a classroom teacher, traditional classroom setting, and then being in art spaces, being an arts educator, and then being able to combine those 2 things and work at the Children's Museum for 5 years, which I honestly felt like it was my dream job to combine these 2 things and work with youth. And then now where again, these museums have been nonprofits, but now in a more traditional nonprofit, and also looking at education where it's kind of hip hop centered, there's more kind of male, historically based in male aesthetic around spoken word. It's really interesting to see the differences where education can still, like I said before, be gendered. So 2 examples that I have, my coworker at the Children's Creativity Museum, when I was a youth programs and community engagement manager there from 2009 to 2014, my colleague was Irina Zadov. She's an education manager. And I worked with her very closely as a peer for 1 year before she was promoted to the director of experience. She was a young professional, I was a young professional. We were both in our late 20s, just finished our master's in ed, and I think that the way that we connected was she was a Belarusian immigrant, I was a children of immigrants, and then I think through just building, having the hard conversations around our stances, around what is radical, what is social justice, where does that fit in the museum's setting, and her understanding what her role was, to be honest, as a white woman to fight and create space for leadership. Not for people of color, like here, I've carved out space for you, but alongside people of color, like myself and our museum colleagues. And other examples she explicitly modeled and consistently backed and asked me what my vision was for the program. And then she then was able to better champion externally what the museum was about, what our team program was about. And then as we also we also thought about the nuanced and sometimes loaded things that come up when you're providing like workforce development for Black and brown young people in San Francisco, when there are very rare opportunities to have Black and brown young people be the face of an institution. So I think the key things, and I'll touch on this and I can come back so that other people can speak. Irina never hesitated in her allyship to young people. She was not afraid to mess up as an ally. Because we were allies, she could ask me, like, okay, am I overstepping? How can I better step back? And then the biggest thing is, in her actions, more than her words, she rolled up her sleeves. She worked alongside myself and my young people on the floor of the museum and knew really gracefully when to step back and let the work shine. So that's my museum example.
I would say one of the most glaring actions I've experienced on an institutional level, and I'm not sure if this is unique to the Bay Area or not. My career as a museum professional is only based here in California. I am not a parent. I am not a mother. I understand the glorious burden. I think I understand the glorious burden a little bit. But practice. We'll take a hard pass on it. Something that I've seen institutionally has been how museums, or particularly museums I've worked in, have reacted to womanhood and motherhood. Like I've seen something as small as creating a room where mothers can nurse, or just very recently at OMCA, we changed some of the signage on some of our bathrooms to become gender-neutral bathrooms. And so, making it more accessible and safe for our trans women or trans men. And so I've seen some of those positive actions on behalf of women institutionally in my time here in California.
So I have some really very practical advice that I had along the way. One is just about breathing and not letting my voice go up, especially when I'm agitated or upset. Making sure I speak slowly, which, as you know, I talk really, really fast as it is. And so, but those are things that signal insecurity, emotionality, loss of control, all the things that women already come in with a little bit of baggage, and those things just emphasized it more. And so things about sitting up straight and being able to breathe, leaning forward, leaning back. So there's a lot of tips. I had an executive coach for a little bit of time, just to try to get through the opening at Cal Academy. And a lot of these things sort of surface that I recognize in myself, and now I'm just much more aware of, sometimes I can't stop myself. I'm like, slow down, you're getting agitated, but I can't, but at least I'm more aware. I think those are really important tools. Even things like, fairly or unfairly, how you dress, all those kinds of things, everything sends a message. And if we're already trying to confront and be sensitive and be aware and mindful of all the perceptions that people have of us, positive or negative, I think just it's incumbent on you, if you want to succeed, to be more aware and intentional about how you present yourself. So I do think that that's something along the way that I really learned. Another one that has helped me is to learn how to be a really effective facilitator. I did feel that for a long time, if I wasn't getting heard or my opinions weren't getting, I would just be upset and disempowered or feel super aggressive. I mean, just wasn't feeling good for myself and probably not for my colleagues either. And one of the most important workshops I've ever taken was at Compass Point about facilitating effective meetings. And not only could I play a better role as a facilitator, even if I wasn't the official facilitator, helping them succeed, made them grateful to me, but it was an outlet for my emotions that if I could facilitate, I didn't feel disempowered. I felt that I could contribute and I didn't have to be emotional about my own idea, that I had, again, an outlet for my passion, but in a specific role. And that helped me because I was the type of person who just jumped in and gave advice to everyone. I mean, I'm a mansplainer. I totally agree that I am, and I wanted to make sure that he was able to contribute to the good of the organization. So those are a few suggestions. I think hopefully now as executive director, some of the things I'd like to put in is we now have one of the directors has a baby at home, and again, like many of us educators who have children late in life, thought we knew it all. And she said she was coming back in a few weeks, and she's going to be fine, and she had blah, 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 and then of course nothing like that happens because then reality hits. And so I've been trying to really model, like, I need to try to go home, or it's great working at a museum because it is 7 days a week, or that I can actually, go and take them on a field trip to another museum and spy, and then I can go to work at my own museum on a weekend. So I think flexible work time is something that is attractive to women, but then as a leader, we have to empower it for the next generation as well. So trying to model and force my staff to take some time off, to take vacation time, men or women, that they need to value what is important in their life, and again, sort of modeling that. I am fine talking about personal things. I talk about my kids, and if they don't want to, they don't have to, but I don't want to create the organization that I would not want to work in. And the last tip I'll just say really is I am an emotional person, and it is bad. I cry at the drop of a hat. I'll cry at a commercial. He knows. I will, and because they're always looking at me at every movie. Carol, mommy, are you crying? Are you crying? And so, yes, I've cried in my boss's office, and sometimes it works, sometimes it's very, very bad. And then, of course, then you live with it, whether it turned out fine or not, and whether the perception you now carry this baggage of yourself, and you hurt your own image of yourself. Like, I can't control myself. I'm emotional. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. So I think that recognizing that and really trying hard to avoid those situations, and that means sometimes going out and taking a walk. And even though people say you should address something right away, maybe that's not for me. So that is something that I think has hurt my career early on, especially in sciences, being emotional and crying, getting teary-eyed, and then also now recognizing, well, maybe sometimes I feel like teary-eyed, nobody else sees it, and not to either beat myself up about it or overcompensate for it. But I know that that's something that I've heard a lot of women talk about, being emotional, not wanting to deny that side of them because it's something we are proud of, but in many situations with many people, that is really a death knell. So being aware of that and trying to avoid those situations, I think is really important for your own self-worth.
So recently, we did have a worker who's returned from maternity leave, and so she's asked for some accommodations, and we've met them. She's asked for space for nursing, just have that restroom for yourself. And she's asked to bring her baby to work, and that's absolutely fine. She gets her work done, baby is sleeping for most of the day, and not bothering anyone. So yeah, we allow for changes that happen when they need to happen. And I've had the privilege to work with a lot of strong women, very supportive women in the nonprofit world as well as the profit and university world. And so they've always encouraged me to take professional development courses with Compass Point, with going to conferences and learning from other people, learning from the professionals, and allowing myself to step back from the silos of work and to think, how can I be a better worker by learning these other skills? And so the way I've been trained in these different areas, I want the workers that I oversee now, that I supervise, to have these opportunities. Like, oh, there's a free training, or there's a training. Go, take the time out. Oh, we'll work something out with their schedule. Or the project will be, can be delayed. We want to work with them so that they feel they are learning while they're working.
Can I just comment, Carol? I really love that you brought up the kind of emotional awareness and sometimes over emotion that we take on as women. I think that is the biggest lesson that I think I'm learning right now as a young director too. And I do actually want to share a quick example of a fellow woman of color who was my mentor, my previous director before I stepped into her role. Again, ironically, after she took maternity leave, and she's like, Amy, I can't come back. Like, I have to take a senior advisor role in the organization. And I was like, this is year 3 of us working together. We were gonna kill it. Like, what? And I had to check my own stuff around not being a mom, but also the reality of like, okay, so this woman is my mentor. She made space for me, and working alongside her in an organization that is not. The ironic thing is, RED right now is the founding ED. He's a man. My co-director is a man. They're great allies. With that said, there's also a lot of like male-dominated performance at the leadership level. So I think in working alongside Susie, there's so many lessons that I implicitly maybe took from her before she transitioned, where I saw her model different responses to this male-dominated leadership style. So she, again, making explicit boundaries around the work, around the well-being of our team, around the well-being of how we held our young people. Like, she would always say to me, not everything has to be urgent. I know the work is urgent, but that task doesn't have to happen today. Other things that she also really asked me, these 2 questions, if anything, I say anything today, she told me to ask myself daily, like, what type of leadership do I want to embody? Again, speaking to the kind of emotional authenticity that is me, versus what type of leader do I want to be? So embodiment of leadership can look different and feel different than kind of our notions of leadership. So, thank you.
Thank you all so much for sharing. And I know I said we would go in order, but because we touched, like Pam and Amy touched on mentorship, and my mentor is sitting in the audience. So for me, that has been an extremely empowering thing that has happened for me at work organically. That my colleague took me under her wing and has given me professional development opportunities, and I think that is one of the best experiences I have had working in the museum field. So I want to jump to question 6, if you don't mind, about mentorship. So if you guys could tell us about a mentor that you had who's played a significant role in your success, I would love to hear. We would all love to hear about that, and if you've tried to emulate them, and how women can support women in that capacity.
There's not one person who's mentored me. the village. I surround myself with supportive people, people that have qualities that I admire. And so every time there's a project that comes up, either at work or otherwise, or outside of work, maybe at church, I try to partner up with these people and learn from them, shadow them, ask them a lot of questions, and a lot of the times people are very willing to share, and people are willing to walk you through these processes and these challenges, when they're outside of work, I can certainly apply them at work because the experiences I have, well, they're mine, and so I can use them in all different areas. And one particular person that I met very early on in my career, she first introduced me to the museum field. Learn about WMA, learn about JFK. 10 years later, I came to JFK and I learned from Susan and Margaret and so many others that, yeah, I take what I learned from them and hopefully I can do them justice and do it well and to spread and grow the field.
I would say, some unexpected mentors. When the Cal Academy hired for the opening some folks in the business and the revenue side that didn't come from museums, came from Universal Studios and the travel industry. I ended up being the content person to represent all of the exhibits in research and education with a team that were, from the corporate tourism field. And boy, I learned so much, and they were so patient. I had actually never seen a profit and loss sheet after having been, in management for many years. And they just actually talked me through it. Didn't think I was an idiot. I mean, I was an idiot. I didn't actually know whether my programs made money or not. I mean, how could that happen, right? And so, I think they wouldn't even know that they were mentoring me along, but just the style of open communication, open to showing me things, and not as in, talking down, but really like they were proud of what they knew as well, as they probably felt like they were learning the museum field, and here we were sharing. And so I would say that one suggestion is really thinking about mentors in a much broader perspective, as in what are they going to learn that I would never have had another chance. And I would have been too embarrassed to ask anyone who would profit and loss sheet, like didn't know up to now. But being able to find that opportunity where it was really an authentic moment of learning on the fly, and sort of absorbing those lessons. And now I feel like I really need more of a formal, like I feel like I probably should go try to take a class or something sometimes in a business school to try to understand it. But I think having known it from a practical, on the ground. So one I would say is look for mentors that may be not what you would expect, and maybe it's the person that you thought you had the least in common with is actually the one where it really opens your eyes to a new world that I would not have understood. I would have another suggestion again about looking at mentors, and again not thinking that you know what a mentor looks like. I would say that I had many mentors, and now looking back, not a single one of them had children. And they're all older than me. It is a different generation. I mean, I think I'm the first of, I think a lot of the paleontologists now, graduate students who came out when I'm younger than me, think about life balance, having family, living where they want to live. I was probably the last of that group of academics where, I was told you were going to apply to Western Kentucky because that is the only job this year. My husband ended up as a professor in Central Missouri because there was literally no other jobs the entire year in paleontology, the whole country. And he got it, he was very proud, but yeah, he lived in Missouri. I was not married to him at the time, I would not have gone. But it was a very different time. And I am so proud of the women and men who come out now who have a sense of what they want and what life looks like. And I don't know how much I could mentor them either. So I do think really thinking it out, like what is it that you want about that mentorship? I had so much mentorship about sort of content, how you create a career. It was a career for a different time. And it probably was a career that wasn't for me, obviously, because I left a tenure track position. It wasn't for me. So I would just, it's not that you shouldn't look for mentors. I just think, think about what you're looking for, and it may not be that traditional. So there could be a lot of people who you call mentors because they're going to help you get ahead in your field, and that's really important. That's a connection. That's a network. But in terms of an emotional mentor, I think you should look around. It could be someone who's younger. It could be someone who's not in your field. But what are the things that you feel are going to complement? It's like looking for a mate in a lot of ways. It's not necessarily what it would look like on paper or what you need on a practical basis. It might be things that you are the most open to and so on. And then lastly, the couple mentors that I think the one that meant the most to me was someone who had not only had his own kids, but decided to be a foster parent in his 50s. And he gave me a sense, I don't think I would have had children without having seen that. Seeing that that he felt it was helped him in his outlook in his career and so on, it wasn't a hindrance, and that he was doing it as a commitment on his life, and he would support me on that. I don't think I would have done that. But he was also the other person, besides the parenting thing, just gave me the most honest feedback ever of all my supervisors. Most of them are too wimpy to tell you what you do wrong. And he pulled me aside one day and he said, "You repeat things too much. You're not talking to you shouldn't talk to donors that way. Why are you contradicting them?" And it was just this moment where, oh my gosh, I've been doing this wrong and I really need to change. So this idea of, what got me here isn't going to get me there. And somebody's got to be honest and tell you, and I was lucky enough to have a supportive boss to do that. Most people just want to be polite.
It's interesting. I don't think I've ever had a formal mentor. And I think the onus of that might be on me. Mentors are listening to formula. So you have to be proactive about that, I believe. And perhaps I wasn't as always as proactive about reaching out as I could have been. But it doesn't mean that I haven't had incredibly helpful and honest and loyal and supportive women and men in my life who have helped me professionally. But for some reason, and again, perhaps it's you have to define what that is for you and what mentorship looks like for you. I wouldn't say I had formal mentors. But one of the things I've taken away from these individuals is the idea of being accessible and accessibility. There aren't a lot of needs in my profession, and I am able to change that and start to meet. And I've been able to be a bit more accessible to others, and open myself up to not only having a mentor, but being a mentor, which quite frankly scares me. And so, what I've taken from them, what I've taken from them is being accessible and being honest. And just try to make it work.
I'd say I'm really feeling each of what you said so far, and I want to echo. I just want to echo everything that you said so far too. Namely, around like where you might not expect a mentor to be what you think they are. I think a lot of times folks will be like, "Oh, that would be the best mentor because that person's going to get me to point B." Right? Or like, I want to create a cadre of like support people that will be like my squads to help me get whatever I want. I mean, again, that sounds a little like, it's a generalization, but it's real. It's real. I want to name that. And I feel like the best lessons I've learned in terms of being a mentee, because I'll be honest, like, I feel like in terms of my own immigrant upbringing, like you are very specific when and how and why you ask for help. And as a Filipina and as a woman of color, as a queer person, I have my own like limitations around when and who and like why I'm being vulnerable. And I think as a director, to what Carol was saying before too, you have to always, you're kind of navigating like, all right, how honest can I be? So I think for me, when finding a mentor, the mentors I have been able to really connect with, and I'll just say, like, I was thinking about it last night with my partner, and I was like, if you could name like a mentor that has really been there holistically for me in my authentic self, where I could just ask and like fall on my face or like ask the most ridiculous questions and be vulnerable. I'm like, who would it be? I'm like, do I have more than one person? And she's like, you know what? It's the person that helped you write your thesis on being your authentic self in the classroom when teaching to help young people be their authentic selves. And I was like, holy crap. So I have to give it up to my Master's in Ed thesis advisor. Y'all write this name down. Rochelle Rogers Ard. She is the Director of Leadership and Development and Employee Engagement at OUSC, Open Unified. She is the fiercest, fearless Black woman, unapologetically, she's like, yeah, the future's female. And how do we be our authentic selves and actually look at it as an asset? She was like, how is your experience an asset and not a deficit? And to be honest with y'all, like, I came out as a professional with the support of Rochelle. And I think that it's one thing to come out as a professional just in my identity, but to come out in my own fearlessness and to come out with my own integrity and to come out in like what kind of impact do I stand for and what am I not going to back down on? And then of course, how am I going to be gracious and how am I going to share space? But to answer that question, it really boils down for me is who can you be your most authentic self with? And who's going to be able to hold that for you in all its iterations?
So I really like what Amy just said about who you can be your authentic self with. I've never formally gone out and looked for a mentor. I don't think many of us have, as we've been saying. And I found that the people who I do call my mentors now are those people who I've just kind of developed a friendship with and been able to speak openly and honestly with, and then they've just turned into mentors and someone that I can rely on in an academic or professional setting. So I do want to call out Adrian. Where is she? Oh, she knows the perfect time to talk about her. So Adrian was my thesis advisor here at JFK, and I literally emulated her by taking her old job. She was the director of Exhibit Envoy for 4 or 5 years. And I've always tried to model myself after Adrian because even though she's been out of the director position at Envoy for 4 years, I still have people mention her to me and just say, oh, Adrian was amazing, she's so positive, she got so much done, she's brilliant. And so I want to emulate her, I want to be just like her, so when I do this position, people say that about me. But I really appreciate that she's always been open with me, she's checked me when I needed to be checked. She has pushed me to move beyond what I thought I could do, and that's what I really appreciated. And my other mentor was actually my college thesis advisor, and we would just sit in his office and talk about growing up in New York and Boston, in the 70s, for him, obviously. We would talk about punk music for hours, but then he was also someone that really pushed me to go further in my academic work also, and I'm still in touch with him, even though I graduated however many years ago. And it's those kind of people who I feel like have watched me grow and learn, whose opinions I really value, and who really know me and know if I come to them with a problem, what the right approach for me might be, or what I can at least consider and think about.
Listening to y'all incredible women here and talking about who can you be your most authentic self with, and I realized that how very much representation matters. And in mentorship, there has to be a level of trust and honesty and vulnerability. And if I don't necessarily see, I see very few Black women in this book, and I see 0 Black men. And there is something to that community that is special, and that's engaging, and that's safe. And perhaps that has always been my reservation with mentorship. I don't think I thought that I could be understood. And just like my own moment, and why that's maybe been such a roadblock with me. Either finding a mentor, or at its very base level, even thinking it was even possible to find a relationship with a professional who could understand the nuances of being a Black woman in this field.
I would agree with that, but I would also say I don't know if we need it. I think that I would have a very hard time finding someone the kind that we're aspired to, someone that I could be vulnerable and be in a professional career. So I would say I would not make people feel bad that they don't have anybody. I think I've gotten pretty far without that, and not that my life would have been better, but I wouldn't. I guess I wouldn't want to end up using that as a reason why I can't succeed. So I do think that it would be really difficult because of personal as well as identity and so on. And it's a field where everybody's so busy. So trying to find someone, without feeling guilty that is taking up their time as well, I think it's hard. So I think I would say that I agree with all these challenges. You can see it's mixed. Some of us have formal mentors, some of us don't. And maybe, we'll all be lucky enough by the time our careers are over to have either had a good mentor or mentee. But don't let that stop you, right? Don't let you hold you up trying to look for somebody or feel guilty that you didn't. I felt guilty. I just realized that I had ignored her email from 2 years ago. And I was like, oh my gosh, I could have been inspirational to somebody and let her on. I feel bad now. But I do think that's, again, I think keep your eye out, keep looking, and I think it could be wonderful. I haven't personally experienced it, and maybe I'm missing something, but I haven't let it hold me back.
I'm just going to continue this conversation super quick, because I also want to say to you, Jessica, like on the flip side, I also, I didn't talk to the person that I was talking about, Rochelle Rochard. I didn't talk to her after my thesis, like 6 months after I graduated. That was the last time we probably spoke. And then I took my first job out of grad school. We had some distance time. I, again, developed my own career with these values of accessibility, inclusivity, fearlessness from her. And it didn't come back around, honestly, until I realized someone asked me to be their mentor. And from a youth development tip, I think the way that everyone can find that authenticity as a mentor, or from a mentor, is extending yourself and being the mentor that you want to find. I don't know if that makes sense. But like, if you create accessibility and model that level of honesty or authenticity, or you want to cultivate the kind of culture you want to extend to folks, the young folks, they will find you. And I feel like, as adults, again, on the youth development tip, like before you call yourself a mentor, let the mentee call you their mentor. Earn that. I think that's a value, a piece too. And also, some of the biggest lessons I've learned in how to ask for mentorship is from my young people. So, yeah, just to speak to your aha moment, thanks for sharing.
I just want to share some additional tips that we got recently from another woman in leadership, Michelle Powers, who's an esteemed woman and just an amazing professional. And her recommendations were to be present, to show up. That's half of it. It's just to come to events like this. To be generous with your time and your resources, and to always be paying it forward. And no one is unimportant. You never know who you're going to re-meet in life, and never be disrespectful, and never take anyone or anything as beneath you, and just give what you can and pay it forward and give it back. So I think that's been a really productive conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all of those valuable insights. So let's circle back and maybe go back to our third question, which is, what do you think will be the biggest challenge for the next generation of women?
The easiest question
Yeah.
by far.
I'll start. Everything that all women have always had to deal with. Healthcare, work-life balance, getting paid what you should be paid, getting, treated equally, getting, credit for what you've done and not having other people take that away from you. dealing with people who talk down to you or who don't believe that you know what you know because of your skin color or your gender or, you know, or your age, yes, or because you're tattooed. So that's kind of a glib answer, I suppose, on my part, but I really think that we haven't made very much progress, as much as I would like to think that we have, and the next generation are going to be facing the same challenges that the generations before have also faced.
I just spoke.
I was about to be like, oh, this is going to come out.
Sweet. I just was about to pass the mic because I just circle back to me, sis.
By far, very complex question, and anything you name. I mean, we're still fighting battles from like 50, 70 years ago. So. Yes, indeed. Yeah. We're not. We make great strides, but we're still getting paid 80 cents to the dollar, and that's Asian women. And then you have white women, and then you have black women, and Latino women, and then you started on Native women. Still fighting the same battles. To twist the topic slightly, I think another challenge that this generation is going to experience, and I think we're seeing it now in the largest, the best word I can use for it right now, is the larger feminist movement around the country, is this idea of intersectionality. And if we're ever going to progress forward, we need to progress forward together and understand that we all have very different experiences as Asian American, African American, queer, and a 20-something. I am no longer in that category. And so to recognize those differences, to recognize those different experiences, to recognize that not everyone's fighting the same exact battle is the first step of us working effectively, efficiently together as a collective of badass women to continue to move us forward. But we have to recognize those differences. And we have to recognize how important they are, how frustrating they are, how painful they are, the history behind those differences, how you hurt me and I hurt you. Because we are all we have. And we really need to work together.
So my answer is a very different tact, again, more practical in some ways because it's about surviving as a nonprofit field. I think that, and I had been a funder, I had been a program officer at a foundation for a couple of years before I took this job. I had a $220 million grant making portfolio strategy. There's a new species of red teeth. So I think the challenge that I see is that there's going to be major disruption in nonprofits. I know everyone says disruption is good, but it's not necessarily when people's lives are in jeopardy. So I think in the nonprofit field, you hear now about the tax code, for example, is going to change how people give. So I think that just the nonprofit field in general and how it affects women is because women do have a better chance at nonprofits of getting ahead and being in education and so on, that we already see that, and the difference between nonprofit and corporate field, and more parity in women in advancement and so on. So I think that that's going to be a gender issue with nonprofits changing. The other thing that I think is changing is this gig economy, and that for a lot of women, it seems like a good thing because you can take care of your kids or your parents, you can have other interests, and you can still be professionally employed and be in the career that you're interested in. So it sounds really good, and it sounds like it could empower if the pay were better and so on. And what I see is the disparity between those is that I think what's going to happen within the nonprofit field is that there's got to be more strategic, deep thinking about how to change systems to help people. It can't be 10 nonprofits each helping 100 people. That is collapsing. You're not going to be able to afford 10 executive directors. You're going to get one executive director to take over those 10 organizations. What does that mean? That means time, strategy, deep thinking, planning, big money, not $5,000 grants that each take 10 hours to prepare. I mean, my goodness, it is about talking to corporations and high wealth individuals in this country about how we support social enterprise. And so I see this conflict between gig economy, everyone doing part-time things, thinking that that's really good for your career, good for your pocketbook, good for flexibility. It sounds really seductive, but what it does not provide is time to sit and reflect, come up with a 5, 10, 20-year plan for society and what your role is. And I think women are going to suffer more about that because we already have all these other family, social obligations. Whether it's fair or unfair, that's the reality. So that's where I feel personally now, I really sometimes wonder whether I should become an executive director. I had a 10 times bigger budget and I had 800 volunteers and 40 staff members, and now I have 16. So it seems like it should have been a smaller job. But if I was an executive director, I don't have to worry all this day to day. I can just worry about my job and do it while somebody else has to worry about these things. So I reflect on that and I have a lot of satisfaction. I love being in a small nonprofit, but I also really think about the future of who we're serving and why we're here. And I'm not sure this is sustainable. I'm not sure it's sustainable personally or as a society. And I think women and our careers and how we deal with that is going to be more impacted with this. And it has to happen for the good of society. But on the other hand, I feel sadness for what we're giving up. That kind of stability in a job, not being the executive director and worrying about payroll, all those other things that we're giving up to try to make a difference. I think it's going to be profound. And I think it's not my generation, I'm 48, I'm closer to retirement than to starving. And I, want to play my part, but I also think that it's a huge unknown. And women and girls have to start playing a role of being more aware, and it can't just be about the gig society and getting to the next travel date. It's got to be about what is society going to look like that we want to live in. Sorry.
Sorry. Don't be sorry. I agree with everything that's been said. We are living in a very troubled time with our current administration and cuts to the arts. This is real, it's happening. Nonprofits are struggling. And yeah, a lot of other nonprofits are staffed by women. And so this is the challenge that we will face. Where are the jobs going to be? What is our next step? But the other side of that, we're still here. We are still working and we can still mentor, we can still support the staff who are coming up and coming out of school and learning and wanting to be in museums. And so offering these younger, inexperienced current graduate students or undergrads opportunities to try and experiment and to guide them along the way. We have quite a few right now who are fresh in the field, their very first year, and they are having a lot of questions, like, why can't we have red wine in the galleries? Why can't we have food or fresh flowers? And these are questions that we need to teach and guide them along the way, because if they're not going to do it, well, who's going to staff these positions? Yeah. So women, men, whoever they are, I think to offer these learning experiences is important, and to band together in these scary times and to know that we are more powerful together than we are alone.
There are so many gems being dropped, I wish I was taking notes right now. I'm glad you're recording this. I'm going to ask for your Google documents later. I'm going to totally dovetail into what Jessica was touching upon around we as women, and also what you said last around working together. But before I get to the together part, I also want to just name some things. So I wrote it down so that I wouldn't get way up there. Okay, so the biggest challenge for me is if we as women regardless of our positionality, power, identity, if we choose not to see how we can be allies to each other first. Number one. Because I think, like you said, in this day and age right now that we're living in 2017, there is implicit and explicit racism, sexism, homophobia. There's just like some wild, wild west happening. And to your point around nonprofits, like, are we going to just accept that? Are we not thinking about, like, some people be like, okay, I'm gonna get rented out, I'm gonna be good, I'm gonna be set for retirement, I've done my legacy work, awesome. I really do want to speak to your point around generational, like, impact. Because what we're doing now is impacting 7 generations after us. I really respect and, like, think about that native quote all the time, or that native philosophy around 7 generations. So I think if any oppression in the workplace, for that matter, if we're not allies to each other, number one, then yes, we can't think about the together piece. We can't take on these big isms, and we can't strategically think about the future. So my practical sense, or my practical story is in my 3 years of being on an executive leadership team, again, where I'm on the flip side, Carol, like you were in the 200 million, you said? 200 million portfolio? Wow. I feel very blessed to be on the other side of the nonprofit world, where I came from a small museum with at that time, $1 million budget, to, I'll be real in this room. I work for one of the, like, most well-funded youth development organizations that's been around for 20 years. When I came from a museum that was around for also 20 years in that moment of time. And so I feel like that privilege that I am witnessing as a person of color, as a woman, as a queer woman in leadership in those 3 years, I continue to be affirmed that one of the biggest challenges for me and for my peers is the inability of men and the inability of also the women that allow men in power to understand and acknowledge the space and assume power they take up in a room. And I feel corny, like, saying this example, like, in 2017, but I'm just going to say it. It doesn't have to be, it's not a men versus women thing. It's just when people take up unaware space, whether it's in a meeting, in a strategic planning session, to your point, who are the people in the room who are thinking about what's going to impact the work 5 years from now? And so while my male colleagues in any sector I've worked in, especially in education, can state confidently, I'm not like women. Yo, I know what sexism is about. Like, I have a daughter, I have a wife. I'm aware of how I benefit from sexism. I know how to work with you. I'm an ally to underrepresented voices of those we serve. And y'all, I had to type this because I was getting emotional. I didn't want to get emotional today, Carol. But I always tell those men, my co-director is a great ally, and he also was like, yo, Amy, check me and help me do better in this work because we can't afford, that's what's urgent. I was talking about what's urgent right now. We trust each other, we've done deep work together, and so when and he can interrupt me, and I can interrupt him, but when I interrupt him and the men that he also has an ear to, like he's in their ear, more than I could ever be. He makes space for me to be in those ears, but he knows that he's in their ear and in these funder meetings because of what, also when you're an alum of an organization, and I believe this, I'm not like shit talking, I'm just like, I believe that those organizations are strong when we employ the young people that we once served. And so it's great when we look at each other and I say, hey, bottom line, it's always a person's actions that speak loudest. And this is my caveat. It's always a person's action that speak loudest when power or decision-making ability is at stake. Anyone can say, all right, like, I'll walk the walk, I'll do the do what I say. What is it? Do as I say, no. Do what I do. It's do what I say, not as I do, but it is do what you do. Like, it matters. And then when it boils down to an important decision that jeopardizes either, again, their positionality, like that's when I'm like, all right, it really shows. And then when you say, and again, this is me talking to our male allies in the room, when you say, I'm an allied woman, I ask, are you an ally to all women? Women of color who are your direct service staff, your women who are often those who are working the most in the public, trans women who are or potentially or who are not being served by your work, emerging women professionals who are brilliant in their own right, but don't have the years of experience to sit at the tables you're sitting at. How are you bringing these voices into the room? Ask yourself, am I speaking for them versus listening and amplifying what they're saying? Because they can say, it's like, well, you're represented, I bring you with me. I'm like, well, it's one thing for you to speak for me, and it's another thing for you to amplify what I'm saying, or actually, let me say it. Like, let me just say it. I'm going on. I just have one more bullet point. Is that okay? All right. So I'm convinced and consistently fighting against the pattern of leadership that perpetuates traditional male domination or male performances of power. And I know that men can also be allies and work alongside of me in this. I believe that. Being the loudest or constant voice in the room, debating until your idea, thinking, concept is received by majority, consistently dismissing the importance of making room or other thought leadership to emerge, I'm over it. I'm just over it, and I want, but it's not like the separatist type shit. Oh, sorry. It's really like, how can we figure this out together, to Carol's point? Like, that's the deep work. Like, we can strategic plan all we want, but it's kind of the mechanisms and how we do the work that also matter. So we can choose, y'all, we can choose to make this power dynamic irrelevant. We can choose to make this power dynamic irrelevant. There are more than enough seats at the table. Forget that, actually, there are all of us in the same room, like today, and if we were all in the same room, and really, again, thinking together, working together, then there would be no room for seats or tables, and we wouldn't have to worry about how many tables and how many seats there are to the tables. Like, we wouldn't actually have to worry about that so much. So, I'll end with this. Sorry, oh my God, going on. We as women can be allies to each other and work alongside men who agree that this isn't the type of leadership that we as a community need to abide by anymore.
That was awesome. So I do want to skip around because we just touched on so many amazing topics, and I just want to again thank you so much because I'm learning more than I could have expected. So let's dive into what tools you all have and what you think has been essential to your journey in the field, and how have you used your tools to empower other people around you. I think we're touching on leadership and how we can support each other, and so it kind of combines some of the topics with the other questions we have on the list.
I think one of the biggest tools that I use is self-advocacy. Close mouths don't get fed, and don't expect anyone to fight for you. I'm going to say that again. Don't expect anyone to fight for you. You have to fight for yourself. You have to ask for that promotion yourself. You have to ask for that raise yourself. You have to learn how to say, excuse me, that's my idea yourself. You have to say, I'm not going to shop yourself. You have to advocate for yourself because no one is going to do it for you. But we don't have some of the aspects we've been touching on today. We don't have some of those same cultural privileges that men in our society have. That has been a very large driving factor in my professional development. I made a really big decision to leave a job because I knew my worth. I advocated for a promotion, wasn't given one, and moved on. I think you have to learn to trust yourself. You have to learn your value as a professional, and you have to fight for that. And I think a lot of us know.
So to speak to Jessica's points about self-advocacy, that's really empowering for the other women who are in the field and in the room with you as well. If you don't say no and you continue to take on more responsibilities at work without the pay raise, as I know some of us have done, then you're basically setting up the next person who comes into that position for the same issues. They're never going to advertise that job at the amount of money that it should be paid at if you've done the work essentially for free. So it's not just self-advocacy, but it's also empowering the next woman who comes behind you. And I also wanted to speak to Amy's point about amplification. And a practical tool in meetings is literally just saying, as Amy just said, this, right? And making sure that if someone hears it the first time, they're going to hear it the second time, or the third time, or the fourth time, and they're going to know how many people in the room agree with that idea and who originally stated it. And the last tool that I use, which is super basic, but speak to the women in the room. You know, don't automatically assume that the man who's in the room is the one who's making the decision, and don't give him the power of your gaze and speaking directly to him. And of course, I'm not saying don't look at the men in the room either, but just be conscious of who you're actually speaking to when you bring up any discussion points.
Just do a quick one, because I'm really feeling what everyone's saying already. To your point and to your point, and this is a tool that I'm actually constantly trying to cultivate for myself, and I need to get sorry out of my vocabulary. A. B, do not ask for permission. I don't need permission to do my job because I'm actually getting paid to do my job. And also, the third one that I'm really trying to cultivate in order to do what Jessica said and what you said is trusting your gut. Trusting your gut as a woman is really hard. And so if I was to continue to be the mentor to the young people that, man, it's so easy for us as women, again, as empaths, to believe in and gut check and also believe in others' guts and to make space for them, to be thoughtful for them, to be collective in acknowledging folks' ideas and praises. I think that's the biggest, again, lesson that I would impart to you all is what is your gut made of? What is the intention of your gut? And who is your gut trying to impact? So those three, like intention, impact, what was another one? Intention, impact, and the integrity of your gut, the strength of your gut. How do you get your gut to work out so that in the marathon of this work, in the strategic thinking of this work, you are then, I'm not saying that you can't be like wavered or convinced otherwise, it's just that how do you listen to your own conviction if something does feel like it's true for you? So that's my quick, I'm still working on it, y'all, so thank you.
I would say share two. One is some things that have been mentioned already. One is saying no, and then the other one is wait time. So wait time is something that, as educators, we're supposed to do. You ask a question and you let the students figure it out because one, it allows even the people who are introverts to be able to come up with an answer. You don't take the person who responds first, you actually value reflection. So as an educator, I always recognize that. But in my job with other adults, I haven't thought about that. And that's one of the things that this mentor that I did have who talked to me was that I rescue people. I jump in because I don't want them to feel uncomfortable. I want to help them. And so I'm trying to answer for them, and it's not necessarily because I want my opinion heard. I'm trying to bail them out. And so that's what you're preventing as an educator, and that's what you have to prevent as a career person, is that women want to help folks. They don't want to seem that other people are uncomfortable. And instead, you're just giving them ideas. You're making them look better. And in some cases, you're opening yourself to attack. Because they didn't want to say that. And now you've got a chance to do that. So that was where the donors was especially. He said, in the board, he's like, Carol, I ask those questions because I know they don't have an answer. And they're confronted with their lack of knowledge. And here you are, Carol, you just jumped in and answered it for them. Why were you doing that? You sabotaged where we're going. And that was just eye-opening, that actually it's not about the other person. If you're in there, you're trying to get your goals accomplished, and that wait time making them uncomfortable. Those silences during a conference call with my board, and my board chair would call me later on and say, I was so uncomfortable with that. And I was like, no, good for you for putting in that wait time, because I wanted to hear what that board member was going to answer to that. I don't agree with anything they say. I wasn't going to bail them out. But I had to learn that. And it is so hard when that silence on a conference call, because you know someone's going to say, hello, is everyone still there? And you're like, yeah, you need to answer that, right? I think that's a really big tool, and I do think that women don't want to have uncomfortable, they want to help someone out, whether they like them or not, and that's been something really important for me not to do. It gives me power. And then the other one is saying no, as you've already said. I also left, I left a tenure track position because I realized it wasn't what I wanted to do, and there was so many sexual harassment issues there. But it was this moment, like I went my whole graduate career, I said, 10 years in college and graduate school, and I just gave it all up. But it is about knowing where your limits are for yourself to protect your own integrity. And I can't change this, and I'm not going to suffer. I've got to leave, and being able to say that. But just in general, back to where I say about the challenge, if we always say yes, it's not just about the low pay, it's not just about sacrificing, working out or seeing your kids. It's about, again, you cannot impact this field and do the kind of work that is expected if you don't have some time to think and read, watch a webinar. It doesn't have to be at midnight watching a TED Talk. You could do it during your work time. It's okay. But if we don't say no, there's always something interesting to distract us. There's always somebody who needs us. There's always something to do. And so I think those are the two that I would say is that self-restraint and self-discipline about the wait time and the saying no are intertwined for me, and I have to actively break that for me. I could do lots of stuff. I love multitasking. I have to say, you know what? This is not about me. It's about my organization, about the field. I've got to say no to this opportunity. But I said yes to this, and I came here today.
Yeah, I said no plenty of times. I was offered certain positions at the job, and I really thought about it. And is this where I want to be? Is this the culture I want to be in? And a lot of times the answer was no. And so I said no to my boss 5 or 6 times in the last couple of years. And it wasn't until I saw a change in the culture, a change in energy, like a positive change, that I could say yes. Yes, I can see myself in this position. Yes, I can make a difference. And so, yeah, that was a very powerful tool. Also, a powerful tool is recognizing everyone in the room, and they all have a voice. And so, I was on a board once, and my role was staff liaison. And so I carved out time to sit and talk with the staff. What are your challenges? What are you working on? How can we help as a board member? And so these processes I'm bringing to my own work now. Once a month I schedule check-ins with the staff, asking them 2 simple questions. What are your challenges? What can I do to help? And talking it through so that there's action. There's an action plan at the end so that they can feel they can do something to make the change. And so, yeah, those are very powerful tools I've learned and continue to practice.
Okay, well, we are coming to the Q&A portion of the panel discussion, but I just wanted to ask if you guys had any last thoughts, like free form, anything you wanted to say that we haven't covered yet, that you really got your chest. Anything?
Well, I'm so very grateful for forums like this, for women and men, and so very grateful for the honest conversations that we're having here today. And that's really important, honesty in these conversations. conversations and not, have these filtered Instagram or professional moments all the time. It's really hard. It can be really frustrating. Very appreciative of it. A question we didn't touch on, which I think was one of the last questions, was about leadership, even not necessarily leadership position. And I intentionally thought about this question, and there's just three quick things I wanted to say. Personally, for me, leadership isn't indicative of your title. It's to me about personal choices that you make in your professional career, and I would really like for us to all continue to choose to be our own advocates, as I mentioned before. And we touched on this a bit. Choose to be very intentional in your words. We say I'm sorry way too much. And some of us on the panel said it, as well today. Don't apologize unless you're trying to do something wrong. We do it all the time. If you reach for the same cart as someone in the grocery store, I'm sorry. If BART train jerks and you fall into the neighbor, you're sorry for that. If you're in a meeting and you say, I'm sorry, but can I say something? Or this may be a dumb question, but anything you say after those words, in my opinion, completely negates your statement. And you look a lot less confident and a lot less prepared. We've got to get over this mentality that we need permission to speak, and that what we say is invalid unless it's prefaced with a unique, I apologize for merely existing and speaking in this space. So to continue to be just really intentional with your words, and to choose to be emotionally intelligent. I'm not, and I think there's a panel, a workshop on it later today, empathy and emotional intelligence. I learned that in the MBA program there. I did an MBA program here at JFK. That has been highly impactful. I think the more you can empathize with other individuals, the more you can understand the human experience. Quite frankly, to me, the better a manager you can become, and the more effective you can become in whatever your field is. The more knowledge you know about people, the more you can use that knowledge. So I just kind of wanted to.
I had one thing to wrap up in terms of this part is just wear all that stuff as a badge of honor and use it if you can. So my example is, and I didn't answer it when you said did you have any challenges from gender? I didn't mention it because it didn't affect what was happening. The power differential was that I was the one in power, but it is also very illustrating and also again a badge of honor. And that is when I was overseeing the planetarium, and of course there are these vendors coming in, and it's $1 million of projectors, and the consultant was from England, and he came in, and me and the assistant director of the planetarium, we walked in, and he asked me for coffee. And my staff member about had a heart attack and just looked at me, and I said, oh sure, I'll go get the coffee. So he sat down, didn't say anything. I went out and got the coffee and brought it back, and I sat down and said, hello, now we can talk business now because I'm the director of the planetarium. And there was that moment where I will just always love, her face. And his colleague, he's the principal of it. And after that, we worked together for 2 years. And he never taught me by myself. He always had somebody else there and somebody else, which is fine with me. But those are the moments where, if I wasn't the person in power, if I was the assistant director, I would not have been happy. And again, I'm saying use those moments. It amuses me to no end now. I am, wear that as a badge of honor. It makes me harder and more aware of everything that happens, and then I used it. I hope I got another $500,000 worth of business from work because he was so ashamed of that moment. But the larger story is that it only happens if you're in power. So again, it is still about women taking on those roles and moving on. And as you all noticed, there's a sea change in museum directorships. We had a workshop the other day, but the largest museums are run by men. Almost every other museum in the Bay Area is run by a woman. And you look at the tenure now of who's been executive director longer, who's had national roles. The president of ACM was a woman from San Jose Discovery Museum, and so on. It's changing in terms of the tenure, in terms of the influence, in terms of the size. I think it's going to be a ways to go though before we see a lot more equity. And I also want to then point out though that changes everything, right? Having those directors changes the vendors, changes the people come to the booths, it changes corporate. Everybody's going to change when the more they see that and the more they are held accountable by other women directors. So the time is coming, but that means all directors, all women need to take that power and use those moments, because that is, as was mentioned earlier, is where everyone has to respond, whether they like it or not. It's business for them, and that will change. I hope that he never asked another woman to go get the coffee for him when he came into an office completely unaware, right? And so hopefully that will change with the next person he works with as well. So wear them all with a badge of honor, and slowly we make changes.
So the qualities of a good leader, of integrity, of respect, listening to others, these are all qualities that anyone can use in any level that they work in, whether it's governing staff, security, maintenance, anywhere. So work with integrity so that people will notice you. They will see like, oh, that person is a very hard worker. That person is invested. They have good ideas. They have questions. They want to improve. And so these working with these qualities will get you places. People will notice, whether it's from the top or just on their own level. People will start talking about you and start asking you for help and wanting to get your ideas. And so,
So I also wanted to speak to the point about leading from any level, and I think that there are many ways that you can amplify women's voices and make sure that women are represented in your museum, no matter what your position is. If you're in social media, share more articles by women. If you're on the content or exhibits team, make sure that there's some objects in the exhibit that helps share the story of women. Talk to the mother when a family comes in, rather than speaking directly to the dad and assuming that he's going to be the one paying. I feel like there are so many ways that you can normalize women as important people, which sounds really silly, but it's not always what people think about, and I think that you really can take small steps at any level to get there. So, do it.
All right, so at this point, we would like to take questions from the audience. Susan.
Yeah, first of all, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much. Yes. I have what I think is a little bit of a simple question, which is good. I think it's really important that we build reflection time for ourselves. So I'm just curious about how all of you, as very busy people, have or have not been able to build some reflection time for yourself. Think about some of the bigger questions or the little questions. How do you manage that on a day-to-day basis?
To reflect on.
How do you build reflection time in your lives? Or do you? Or it's like, oh, you think you're going to do that, but it doesn't really happen.
No, I do. I moved out here to California 7 years ago for a JFK program, and I learned a lot about work-life balance, just the culture of maybe not all of California, maybe just the Bay Area, but just the work-life balance culture. It's now ingrained in me. I think it's highly important. One of the ways I'm a fundraiser, but at heart I am a bit of an introvert, and so that means I do physically take some alone time for myself
I'll just say that there's just not enough time, and again, as someone who I give too much more externally. I am like an extrovert that I need to be like, again, thank God for my partner. She also is again like, has a leadership role in San Francisco Public Library, and to be honest, the stories that we come home to and tell each other, that's a time that we get to reflect. I trust her in so many ways as she navigates her world. We often give each other that advice. Again, she's another person that I can be completely authentic with in my struggles. The one quick thing that I'm actually trying to create a practice for myself, I have a hard time really carving out that alone time to what you said. And so I think that whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, for me, like if I'm gonna go to see something like some inspirational art that's not connected to my work, or I'm gonna actually read that article that I told myself to read. To Carol's point, I'm gonna schedule during my workday because it does actually impact the work that I'm doing. And then the third point is I'm really trying to cultivate this is like a true plug. I'm gonna speak this intention out. I'm trying to cultivate a circle of women of color in leadership. Again, we don't have to be at the executive leadership level, just women who are navigating their own embodiment of leadership. And I think the more that we can create the circles that we want and what we want to see in terms of representation, and I encourage each of you, imagine what the impact would be if each of us, to your point, actually created a circle of reflection, of intentional kind of navigation, and also just honestly like a group, built-in group support. And I encourage you also to be interdisciplinary about it. I loved shooting, this stuff with my coworkers that were in the museum field. I also got a ton of inspiration and insight from those who were not just the audience members of the museum, but other educators, other folks that are innovating their own industries. And the more interdisciplinary my circles can be, I think it's beneficial. So again, to your point, creating that women's or men's or a circle of authentic reflection is key.
Well, I am one of those people who love to buy journals and paper products and never use them because it's, I start one page and it's like, oh, it didn't turn out right. I better start another one. Oh, I should watch this video on bullet journaling. I'm sure it's going to work for me. So I have a lot of intention to be reflective, and I think my backpack is in my car has 3 journals right now, all that have 5 pages in them, and I love pens. So I think one is just trying to make it as available and attractive, so I will do it. This is where I really tell my staff, I tell others to do it, and then I feel like, well, since they're doing it, it's okay if I don't. It's try, but I do think that it is truly important to reflect and have those times. So there's a few things that I do tricks, and maybe I don't actually write into my email, but I take the AC Transit bus at Transbay Terminal bus to work, and it's about 0.9 miles from work, and I could take the BART, it would be closer. But having that walk is something that really clears my head, and by the time I get to work, I have emails completely constructed in my head, how I'm going to have a difficult conversation in the day. So forcing myself to have that distance, even though there could be shortcuts, is that it's not a shortcut. And then coming home as well. I usually sleep on the bus, but I don't do work on the bus. One, because I get motion sick. That's why I was not a good director of the planetarium, because almost every director made me sick. But besides that, but that's also just my excuse. I don't work and so on the bus and on the travel, so I can get ready for what I need to do at home or prepare for the next day. The third thing that I will say that was really helpful for me was I did do the California Association of Museums Future Leaders of the Future training, and there's this idea of, in order to be a futurist, in order to look ahead, is how do you constantly survey the signals around you, and that is like, what do you read, being on blogs, watching TED Talks. And so that's my, it's not just an excuse, I hope, but just I'm telling myself it's okay build that in, whether it is at 1 o'clock in the morning, because I don't have the discipline to go to bed, or whether it's at work sometimes, but saying that, we are about understanding, learning, understanding children, understanding engagement. We kind of actually need to learn what is engaging for people. So I think that there's a couple things. It's just, I think, trying to build in the time, having a tool with me at all times, or 7 tools, 7 nice moleskins. At the same time, will hopefully at least try to allow me to do that. And then also just taking the time to do that and not feeling like it's extraneous or it's outside of my time. I'll wash dishes and I'll listen to, something on a podcast and the radio. So I feel like all those things will eventually help me, especially, the walking and the time. But I do think it's something that we don't do enough, and we can't do deep work unless we do some of that.
So I have regular reflection time. I have a group that I meet regularly to share our joys and concerns. And so this is the time where I can step back, when I'm not working 80 hours a week, when I'm not, so focused on what's ahead that I forget to look around.
Any more questions from the audience? Please.
My name is Lisa Regala. Thank you all so much for everything today. I'm in the spirit of honesty. I'm asking honest questions. So I'm associate director at the Bay Area Discovery Museum, and I came from a science background as well as Karen did. And honestly, I'm 40 years old and I don't have children. And in the science world, that is celebrated. I mean, I would be a gift to a chemistry lab because of this. But I've actually found in the museum, I'm looked at oddly because, and there's a question in people's minds, why are you a 40-year-old woman that doesn't have children? Because out of all the senior leadership in our museum, I'm probably the only person out of about 10 people that doesn't. And I struggle to, of course, I know there's a long way to go, and I'm so supportive of women having a family and having their singers and being able to take their time off and have flexible schedules. But as a person, a woman who doesn't have children, sometimes that means I'm taking on that person's extra work while they're on maternity leave. I'm asked to stay late because my personal life isn't valued the same way as it would be if I had to leave to go pick up a child. And so I'd love to hear how people have struggled with that, dealt with that, and how we can, mothers and non-mothers alike, support each other.
So just for the sake of recording, my question was about how mothers and non-mothers can support each other equally in the workplace. It's a great question, by the way.
I mean, having done both, and at least when I do know each other, and that is exactly right. I mean, nobody, literally, not a single one of my supervisors, the one that became my supervisor, none of my supervisors, none of my mentors, my graduate advisors, no women paleontologists. I mean, maybe one woman paleontologist has a child. Not a single one. Half the women paleontologists. So it was a big surprise for me to have one. I mean, I really did not. It was just not part of my worldview. So having been on that side, I do think it is a generational thing because it was expected and it was very strange to want one. And I do think that that kind of strain is very different. But that's why I am more sensitive to the other side as well. So I think that there's larger issues of not just the work-life balance, but I do think that there's another sort of long-term thing is about how do we advance in the field. So is it going to be set up in a way that, for me, I was able to advance in my career before I had children. If that's not, having children first, then does that mean that they're permanently also on a different track as well? So I think that there's both short-term and long-term as in workload and things like that, but I do think that these different trajectories are going to intersect at some point and potentially be contradictory in terms of how we look and value. And I do think that's where the gig economy and stuff like that is going to contribute to this, is that, if we don't think that there's a one career path, it opens it up, but it's also very limiting in some ways as well. Like everyone's open part-time, everyone's always temporary, no one stays in one place, there's no, tenure, there's no seniority, everything's just a free-for-all, and I don't think that's good either. So I think too much flexibility in the long run is not going to help women make systemic changes because it's all about temporary fixes. So I do think that that as a woman who did not have children, I feel that I could and I did do my job as heading up early childhood and things like that without my own child. I do feel that there needs to be, especially if nonprofits and museums, that there is research out there, there is best practices. It can't just all be seat of our pants. So if I didn't have a child and people would say, why are you overseeing early childhood and so on, I say, that's because there's actually a practice, there's actually research. I don't actually have to figure this out myself. And I do think that that's really important that our field lacks, and therefore, if you don't have personal experience, you can't do it, right? When in fact, you can. So I think it's a respect and professionalization of our field to say that whatever your personal, there are things you can bring in skills and talents and research that you can bring to bear on your job and still be successful without personal experience on that. On the other hand, I do think that women who have kids still feel that they're discriminated against. And so I think maybe what you're saying still is this sort of this transitional period where I think a lot of, because of this generational change and so on, especially in science museums, is that women who have children still are feeling that they, and either rightly or wrongly, that there's a lot of impediments to their success. I think children's museums is different because most children's museums, leaders, I think, have children, whereas in most science centers still it's not. So I don't know, I'm rambling right now. I think that having done both, I think there's clearly, as you said, there's challenges on both, and both sides needs to be sensitive. I also think that there is this transitional period where there's a lot of pent-up resentment, inability to sort of face changes that hopefully will work itself out as different generations get a chance to work with each other more. But I do think that a professionalization of the field and talents that people bring would help all of us. If we didn't keep judging people based on what they look like versus saying that, getting and having experience and reading about something and understanding research is needed, would help as well. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. It's so personal to me. I just, having seen both and seeing people struggle on both sides, I do think that it's a lot of women my age have regretted what they've done. I feel that's really sad. I don't think I would have regretted it, although he's darn cute and a lot of trouble too. But I do feel that because I grew up in that culture, I would have been okay. But I see women struggling, and I feel really bad that they feel they have to make a decision. I think it's really, really challenging.
I cannot answer your question. I want to thank you though for the question, because this is not a scenario that I ever really had to think about as a situation that I was unaware we were going through. So what you did, I think, for all of us here is you allowed us, and you opened up the door, you allowed us to take your experience, we're going to hold it, and I think we're going to remember it as we go through our professional careers. A follow-up question, if you don't mind. You mentioned having to kind of take on additional responsibilities. Is it very, very intentional mandates from supervisors, or is it something that it's you're self-inflicted? Is it you feel like you have to take on these additional responsibilities, or is it kind of mandates from the top that, okay, so-and-so is here, so I need you to step up something? If you feel like you were kind of self-imposing things, then perhaps
it's more of, yes, I'm being asked and I'm saying yes, right? So I'm being asked to do something and I'm saying yes, and there are times I say no, right? It's also just a feeling of, it's a very subtle feeling someone showed up late to a meeting and it was because there was a sick child at home, or they had to dial in from home that day and they can't come into work, that's just, there's no questions asked. But if I needed to go to yoga in the morning to clear my head or something that was for me, right? And needed to come in later, whatever, it would be looked at, or why aren't you here, or you can't just stay home that day and just call in and be present, right? So there's also just that subtle thing happening of no one's directly saying don't do it, but there's kind of that really, do you really have to stay home today? Do you really have to take this call from your car? Or, that kind of thing happening.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's exists, yeah.
Thanks for your honesty, Carol. And what was your name?
Lisa.
Lisa. Can I also chime into this? I feel like your question that you brought up, as a queer person who again is masculine presenting, there's so many assumptions around not only like how I move in the workplace and then my leadership style, or assumptions around, oh, that's awesome that your partner, if you guys decide to have kids, it won't affect your career.
Wow.
I'm like, for real? Wow. Okay. I see you. So I want to just validate you in that, you know what, and I've been very fortunate to have, her name is Diane Balzer, look her up. She's a professor of women's studies in the East Coast, but she, again, has chosen, she has chosen intentionally to not have a family, but also she challenges us as women and men to think about when we choose to not take on that project, that our life is less valuable, that you may not, or you might not choose to have a family or children, but what you do choose isn't a consolation prize, or any less important, or that Carol's career is jeopardized because she chose to have a child later, in your career. So I feel like if we as women actually don't prescribe, I know it's easier said than done, but if we as women together thought about, I'll bring it back to my experience. So as a queer person, yeah, I have chosen family. Yeah, I am a really awesome auntie to other friends who are parents, who need me, whose children depend on me. And yeah, if I left work to go pick up my friend's daughter because she's in a meeting that went over, that's just as equal. And yeah, that's me as a queer person. I challenge straight women, again, trans women, women of color, who we, coming from different non-traditional setups around family, let's actually also push each other around defining and challenging what family looks like. Because I feel like whether you choose it or you don't choose it, if we can shift the paradigm around how we take up space as women, that again, if you need to do yoga to self-care in the morning so that you're better, I think for me, at the end of the day, you make choices, and you will make choices, and all of us will make choices. At the bottom of it is, how am I going to be a better manager, a better colleague, a better leader, regardless, because those aren't deficiencies, they really aren't. So I would, again, my last thing is find an ally in your workplace, mom and not mom, or non-traditional mom, and really lean on each other, lean into it. And I think there's wisdom there.
So unfortunately, we're out of time, but I would love to have this conversation go all day long. But I would just like to invite all of us to give a big round of applause for our honored to be a part of this, so thank you so much. So I just have a few announcements. We're going to take a half-an-hour break, and we're going to regroup at 1:30 for the various workshops. Adrian's workshop about activating yourself is going to be right here in this space in 2:15, and then Museum Workers Speak with Amy, Brenda, and Terry is going to be in 2:16 here, which is advocate for yourself. And then Dr. O's workshop about Emotional Intelligence and the Mindful Leader is around the corner in room 224, and we have signs out. Please eat and drink to your heart's delight. We have so much food, and I hope that all of you can stay and participate in the workshops. And I don't think we'll be together as a group again. So thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Karen and G, for recording and live streaming. It's really wonderful. And we'll be sure to share it out with everyone when the event is ready. So thank you for being here. And that's all. So,
Thank you, everyone.